This is, I mean, it's a chicken and the egg question in a way. Is it the wines you're working with push you towards style, or do you have a style in mind and you try and find the wines that get you there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I've, as a winemaker here for a reasonable length of time, I've had an idea of the top end wines that we were making, where they should always be. And for me, being a Coonawarra Cabernet Barossa Shiraz, it was always going to be driven by a wine with good fruit drive aromatically, but structurally it needed the poise and the definition to sit as a wine that's beautiful as a young wine, but a wine that will develop with the integration of the tannin into that structure. So that's what really drove it, and 2012 supplied what I was looking for. So the blend was put together, and that was just the start of the journey.
I remember that 2012 well, and we talked about it being a wine of sort of admirable restraint and balance, and and elegance. And so you go on from that vintage, and you start, you make the next couple of vintages. How does that work when you've hit the ground running so impressively in 2012? You've got to keep the momentum going with that. How do those next couple of vintages work? What do you just keep reinforcing the original idea, or do you look to shape it and evolve it?
The great thing about the first 5 vintages now that we can sit back and look at those is that the 5 vintages are very, very different vintages in growing conditions and stylistic offering. And I think now we can sit back and look and reflect back on those and go, we are really achieving what I was setting out to achieve right from the start, is a wine that sits at the top end, but it's a wine that is not homogenised and not dumbed down, that's not the right word, but homogenised to fit into a grouping where they all are similar. So by that, what I'm referring to is their vintage definition. So 2012 was all about the fruit drive and the structure and the pristine length through the palate. 13 was a slightly warmer year, and frosts, and the berry size was much smaller, so concentration and tannin drove those wines. So when it came to blending them, we changed the idea of what the blend should have been for a wine like 2013. So we offered a blend with more Shiraz in it to give it some more balance through the palate, which then made it similar to the 12 in its flow, because if we'd kept it at 70 or 80% Cabernet, then the wine would have been very, very structured and a long way away. 2014 came along, which was a cooler year and a wet year in a wet vintage at times in February. So we could actually use more Cabernet in 2014 because it already had that lovely fruit drive and it had a lovely richness already because of that cool growing season. And so we used less Shiraz in 2014. So we started to then get into this, we're blending a wine for the season. And we're blending it to be Caley, which is at the top end, which is loosely all about fruit drive and structure and a lovely pristine palate. But the percentages that we're playing with are very different because we're really trying to understand what the effect of that vintage will give us, not only as a young wine at release, and not forgetting that 2014, we had only just bottled the 2012, and we were still 3 years away from releasing the very first one. So it was still conceptual, but that's the groove that we got into. After 14, I realised where we were going as far as stylistic offerings. So whilst that initial thought was there, the vintages then started to weave where we ended up.